She threw herself in front of me, arms out, eyes wide like I was about to walk into traffic. "Daniel, stop. You can't go up there." I laughed. I actually laughed. Because I thought she was joking. This was my house. I had been gone 6 months. 6 months of concrete dust and California heat, and missing home so bad it hurt. And my best friend of 12 years was standing on my staircase, blocking me with a look on her face I had never seen before. Not guilt, not embarrassment, pure fear. And that's when I knew. Whatever was waiting for me at the top of those stairs, it was going to change everything. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You're going to want to stay for all 5 parts. I slammed my suitcase into the back of the cab and told the driver, "Charleston, south of Broad." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Long trip?" "6 months," I said. He let out a low whistle. "Glad to be home." I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. You have no idea. Here's the thing about working in historic preservation. People think it's romantic. They picture you walking through grand old mansions, running your hand along original woodwork, saving beautiful things from being torn down. And it is those things. Sometimes. But it's also 6 a.m. site meetings in parking lots. It's fighting with city engineers over load-bearing walls. It's eating vending machine sandwiches in your car because the nearest restaurant closed 2 hours ago. It's being 5 states away from everything familiar while a building that's been standing since 1887 slowly, stubbornly, refuses to cooperate. My name is Daniel Walker. I'm 34 years old. I've spent the better part of a decade restoring things that other people have given up on. Old buildings, forgotten structures, places that look like they're done but aren't. Not really. Not if you're willing to look closer. What I did not fully understand, for a very long time, is that the same thing can be true about people, about feelings, about the parts of yourself you tuck away in a corner and tell yourself you'll deal with later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The project in California had been a beast from the start. A 19th century commercial building in the heart of Sacramento, 4 stories. Original brick facade, a basement that had flooded so many times the floor, had basically turned into a geology experiment. The city wanted it preserved, the developer wanted it profitable. My job was to stand in the middle and make both of those things possible at the same time. That's always the job. We'd been told 12 months. We finished in 6. I won't pretend I wasn't proud of that. But the moment I got the call, telling me we were done, that the final inspection had cleared, that the keys were being handed over, that I could go, I didn't feel proud. I felt one thing: I need to go home. I booked the first flight out. I didn't tell anyone. Not my coworkers. Not my neighbor who'd been collecting my mail. Not even Olivia. Especially not Olivia. Olivia Bennett, 32 years old. Interior designer. The most talented person I've ever watched work, and also the most stubborn person I've ever argued with. Which is saying something, because I once spent 3 weeks in a meeting with a structural engineer who genuinely believed a conch was a feeling. Olivia and I had been friends for 12 years. We met freshman year of college. I was sitting in the back of an art history lecture, half asleep, when someone sat down next to me and dropped a coffee cup that exploded across both our laptops. She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, completely deadpan, "Well, that's my semester deposit gone." And I laughed so hard the professor stopped talking and looked at us. That was Olivia. She had this way of saying the exact thing you weren't expecting, with the exact timing you didn't know you needed. And somehow it always made the situation feel survivable. We became inseparable after that. The kind of friends who don't need to explain themselves, who can sit in total silence and somehow still feel like they're having a conversation. When I bought my house in Charleston, a 1920s craftsman that needed more work than I was probably qualified to give it, Olivia was the first person I called. Not because she's a designer, although that helped, because she was the first person I wanted to share it with. That was 3 years ago. Since then, she'd had a key. That was the arrangement. When I traveled, which was often, because the work took me everywhere, Olivia checked in on the house. She watered the plants I always forgot I had. She made sure the pipes didn't freeze in winter and the windows were locked in summer. She kept the place alive while I was gone. I'd offered to pay her every single time. She'd refused every single time. "It's not a job, Daniel," she always said. "It's just what you do for someone you care about." The cab turned onto my street just before 11:30 at night. The city was quiet, that heavy, warm quiet that Charleston does in late evening, the kind that makes you feel like the whole world has exhaled. Spanish moss hung from the trees along the sidewalk. Somewhere down the block, somebody had their porch light on. Mine did too. I could see it from the end of the street. That warm, yellow glow from the upstairs window. The faint sound of music, something soft, acoustic coming through the front of the house when I stepped out of the cab. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. I'd thought about this. Being home. All the small, specific things I'd missed. The weight of the front door. The particular creak of the third porch step. The way the kitchen always smelled faintly of old wood and the cedar oil I used on the floors. I'd thought about walking back in and feeling like myself again. What I had not thought about was what Olivia might be doing inside at 11:30 on a Tuesday. I didn't worry about it. She had a key. She used it sometimes. It wasn't unusual for her to work late at my place. She always said the light in the upstairs room was better than anything in her apartment. I figured I'd walk in, call her name, see her startle the way she always did when she was deep in a project, and then probably spend the next 2 hours catching up over whatever she had in the kitchen. That was the plan. I grabbed my bag from the cab, paid the driver, and walked up the front path. The third porch step creaked exactly the way I remembered. I put my key in the lock. The door swung open. I stepped inside. The music was louder. Now I recognized it. Actually, it was a playlist I'd made years ago. Old folk songs. Mostly. The kind of music that makes you feel like you're somewhere slower than wherever you actually are. The living room was neat. The lamp on the side table was on. There was a mug on the coffee table tea. By the look of it, still steaming slightly. I set my bag down by the door. Olivia, nothing. Toward the stairs. I got one foot on the bottom step. And then, I heard her. Daniel. Her voice came from above me. The top of the stairs. Sharp and flat at the same time. The way a voice gets when someone is trying very hard to sound calm and not quite making it. I looked up. She was standing at the top of the staircase. And the moment I saw her face, something cold moved through my chest. Because in 12 years, through everything, I had never seen Olivia Bennett look like that. Not the night her dad went to the hospital and she called me at 2 in the morning. Not the day she lost the contract she'd spent a year building toward. Not even the terrible, awful 6-week stretch after her breakup with Marcus, which had been the kind of breakup that leaves a person quiet for a very long time. I had never seen her look afraid. Not like that. Her face was pale. Her hands were gripping the banister. Her eyes, those dark eyes that always seemed like they were about 10 thoughts ahead of whatever she was saying, were wide and fixed on me with something that looked very much like panic. "Daniel," she said again, lower this time. "You weren't supposed to be here." I stared at her. "What? You?" She stopped. Swallowed. "You didn't tell me you were coming home." "I wanted to surprise you. I put my foot on the second step. What's going on?" "Wait." She moved, fast. She came down the stairs and stopped 2 steps above me. And suddenly she was standing between me and whatever was up there, her arms slightly out at her sides like she was going to physically stop me.
"Don't come up yet."
I looked at her. I looked up the stairs behind her. The light in the hallway was on. The door to my office, the room I used for planning and paperwork, and the 1,000 scattered notes that came with any major restoration project was closed. "Olivia." I kept my voice even. "What is in my house?" "It's not," she exhaled sharply. "It's nothing bad, I promise you." "Daniel, nothing is wrong. You're early. You weren't supposed to see it yet." I wasn't ready. Ready for what? She pressed her lips together. "Olivia, She held up one hand. "Just give me 5 minutes. Please. I just need 5 minutes to what? To hide something? In my house?" I heard my own voice go flat. That wasn't anger. Exactly. I didn't feel angry. I felt something stranger than that, a cold, tight thing in the center of my ribs that I didn't quite have a name for. Because this was Olivia. This was the person who had never, not once in 12 years, made me feel like I couldn't trust her. And she was standing in my staircase, blocking the way, with a look on her face that said there was something she absolutely did not want me to see. "Step aside," I said quietly. "Daniel, Olivia." I met her eyes. "I have been gone for 6 months. I just took a red-eye from Sacramento. I am standing in my own house, and my best friend is blocking my staircase." I paused. "Step aside." A long moment passed. Something in her face shifted. The panic didn't go away. But something else crept in behind it. Something that looked almost like resignation, like she'd been holding onto a breath for a very long time and had finally run out of room to keep holding it. She stepped aside. She followed me up the stairs without saying a word. My hand touched the door handle of my office. "Daniel." Her voice was quiet. "Whatever you're thinking, it's not that." "I'm not thinking anything," I said. "I'm just opening a door." I turned the handle. The door swung open, and I stopped. I stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds, and I did not move, and I did not speak, and I did not breathe. Because the room was not the way I had left it. My desk was still there, my actual work desk, with my drafting lamp and my stacks of project folders, but it had been pushed to one side to make room. The other half of the room, the half that had always been empty because I'd never found a good use for it, was now I didn't know what it was. That's the only way I can describe it. It was something I had never seen before and didn't have a word for. There was a work table, a good one solid wood, with an architect's lamp. There were design boards propped against the far wall, with fabric samples and paint swatches and photographs pinned to them. There was a neat row of design books along a shelf I didn't remember installing. And on the big wall, the long wall above both of our desks, the wall that had been empty since I moved in, because I could never decide what to put on it. There were photographs, dozens of them, not frame-themed, pinned directly to the wall with careful, deliberate precision, like someone who'd spent a lot of time getting each one exactly right. I walked closer. They were pictures I recognized. Of course they were, because I had taken them. Every single one of them, across years of projects across the country. A rooftop in New Orleans. A brick facade in Boston. The inside of a building in Virginia, with light coming through broken windows in a way that looked like something out of a painting. I had sent all of these to Olivia, not with any particular intention. Just the way you share things with someone who cares. A photo here, a photo there. Look at this wall. Look at this detail. Look at what we saved. She had kept every one of them. She had printed them. She had pinned them up. She had arranged them into something that felt, standing there in the half-dark of that room, less like a gallery and more like a map. Like the visual record of a life that two people had been living in parallel, in pieces, across hundreds of miles. Beside the photographs, pinned at careful intervals, were other things. A ticket stub from a concert we'd gone to 4 years ago. A postcard I'd sent from Portland. I didn't even remember writing it. A folded piece of paper I recognized as a note I'd slipped under her door the morning after her breakup with Marcus, when I hadn't known what to say and had just written, "You're still the most capable person I know. That doesn't change." She had kept that too. She had kept all of it. I turned around. Olivia was standing in the doorway. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest. Her chin was up, the way it always went when she was bracing for something. But her eyes, she couldn't quite control her eyes. They were bright. Not with tears. Not yet with something else. Something that looked like the moment just before someone finally says a thing they've been keeping in for far too long. "Olivia," I said. My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "I know," she said. "I know how it looks. What is this?" She uncrossed her arms. Let them fall to her sides. "It's a workspace," she said. "The light in here is better than my apartment. You've told me to use the room whenever I want. I didn't think you'd mind if I—" She stopped. "I thought I'd have time to explain before you saw it." "The photos," I said. She was quiet. "Olivia. The photos. I like looking at them." She said it simply, without apology, but her voice had dropped about half a register. "I miss you when you're gone, Daniel. Those pictures remind me of where you are, what you're doing." She paused. "They make the room feel less quiet." I looked at the wall again. 12 years of a friendship, pinned up on wall in a room she'd quietly made her own while I was 3,000 miles away. There's something else, I said. Because there was. I could feel it the way you feel a current of air before you see where it's coming from. She hesitated. Then, the box. I hadn't noticed it until she said it. On the work table, half hidden under a folded cloth, was a small wooden box. Simple. Handmade. Maybe. With my name written on a card, tucked under the latch. I started toward it. Daniel, she got there first. She put her hand flat on top of it. Not yet. That has my name on it. I know. In your handwriting. I know. She pressed her hand harder against the lid. Like the box might try to open itself. Just not tonight, please. You just got home. Let me just... Olivia. I said her name like a question and a statement at the same time. She looked up at me. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw it. The thing she'd been carrying. The thing she'd been carefully, quietly, expertly keeping below the surface of every text message and every phone call and every "did you eat today?" Daniel, and every postcard she'd kept and every photograph she'd pinned to a wall in a room that was half hers now. She loved me. I didn't say it. She didn't say it. We stood on opposite sides of a work table with a wooden box between us, and neither of us said the thing that was suddenly filling up all the space in that room. She picked up the box and held it against her chest. Go to sleep, she said. Her voice was steady. Olivia could always make her voice go steady when she needed it to. You've been traveling for hours. We can talk in the morning. About what? She looked at me for a long moment. About everything, she said. I slept in my own bed for the first time in 6 months. I should have gone out immediately. I know that. I lay there and stared at the ceiling and thought about the wall of photographs and the postcard I didn't remember writing and the note she'd kept and the look on her face when she put her hand over that box. I thought about 12 years. I thought about how Olivia had always been the person I called first, before my family, before anyone, when something good happened or something bad happened or something just happened and I needed someone to tell it to. I thought about the time she'd driven 4 hours to help me move equipment to a project site because my van had broken down and I couldn't get a rental on a Sunday. I thought about the dinner 3 years ago, right after my last relationship had finally, completely fallen apart. When she'd sat across from me in a restaurant and listened to me talk for 2 straight hours and then said very quietly, "For what it's worth, I think you've been trying to fit yourself into a shape that was never going to work. You're not that shape, Daniel." At the time I'd thought she meant my career, the way my ex had wanted me to take a stable office job and stop traveling, the choices I'd made that had cost me that relationship. Now, staring at my ceiling at 1 in the morning, I wondered if she'd meant something else entirely. I wondered a lot of things. Eventually, I slept. In the morning, I came downstairs to find Olivia at my kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee. She was already dressed. She had her design bag over the back of her chair, which meant she was planning to leave. She'd made herself an exit route. That was very Olivia. I sat down across from her. She pushed one of the cups toward me. Neither of us said anything for about 30 seconds. Then I said, "The room looks good." She looked up. "I mean it," I said, "whatever you've done with the space it works. It's better than what I had." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I wasn't sure you'd see it that way. Did you think I'd be angry? I thought you might feel," she searched for the word, "invaded." "It's your room too," I said. And I meant it, even though I hadn't known I was going to say it until it came out. She went very still. "Daniel, you've had a key to this house for 3 years. You take care of it better than I do. You fixed the kitchen faucet while I was in California, and didn't even mention it until I found the receipt. You left it under the sink. I wasn't snooping. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm saying I stopped. Started over. I'm saying the room looks good, and I'm glad you used it." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked down at her coffee. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. I waited. She took a breath. "I got an offer." She told me everything. A design firm in New York. One of the big ones, the kind that had offices in 3 countries and clients whose names you'd recognize. They'd seen her portfolio. They'd been following her work for 2 years. Apparently, though she hadn't known it, they wanted her to come lead a major hospitality project. 12 months. A creative director role that would be the biggest thing she'd ever done. She'd found out 3 weeks ago. She hadn't told me. I sat across from her at my kitchen table, and I let all of that land. 3 weeks, I said finally. She looked at the table. Why didn't you tell me? Because she stopped. Because every time I thought about telling you, it turned into a conversation I wasn't ready to have. What conversation? She looked up. And that steadiness in her voice, the one she always kept so carefully in place, cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. Did you even know I wanted this? She said. Did you know? Because I've been building towards something like this for years, and I've told you pieces of it, but I don't know if you ever really. She pressed her lips together. You always come home, Daniel, and when you do, everything just revolves around you. Your projects, your timeline, what you need. I love you, and I mean that, but I don't know if you've ever once asked me what I'm building toward. The words fell into the kitchens like some solid. I didn't answer right away, because I was sitting with the uncomfortable, specific realization that she was right. I had never asked, not once, not in 12 years, not because I didn't care. I did. Genuinely, I cared more than I knew how to say, but because somewhere along the way I had started assuming that Olivia would always be here, available, waiting, present in the way that solid, permanent things are just present. I had treated her like the house, like something beautiful and reliable that I could leave and come back to. And I had never once asked her if that was a role she wanted to play. You're right, I said. She blinked. You're absolutely right. I leaned forward. I never asked. I should have. I don't have an excuse for that. I paused. But I'm asking now. What do you want? Olivia? Not what you think I want to hear. What do you want? She looked at me for a long time. I want the job, she said quietly. I've already decided I'm taking it. I nodded. I want you to know, she said, that this doesn't mean that this doesn't change. She stopped. I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say. Then tell me what's in the box, I said. Her breath caught. We looked at each other across the table. I watched something move through her, a long, private calculation. The kind that happens when a person decides whether to be honest or whether to keep something safe by keeping it hidden. She stood up. She went to the counter where she'd left her bag. She came back with the box. She set it between us. She sat down. She looked at me. Before you open it, she said, I need you to understand something. I didn't put that room together as a declaration. I didn't intend for you to see it like that. She exhaled. I just needed somewhere to keep the parts of my life that felt most real. And those photos those were part of that. I looked at the box. Open it, she said. I did. Inside, on top of everything else, was a letter, folded once. My name written on the outside in her handwriting, careful, slightly tilted, the way she always wrote when she was concentrating. I looked up at her. 6 months ago, she said, when you left for California. I wrote it the night you drove away. She held my gaze. I never sent it. I unfolded the letter. I read it, and then I read it again. And when I looked up, I couldn't quite arrange my face into anything neutral, because the letter said exactly what I had spent 12 years telling myself I was imagining. I miss you more than I want to admit. I've been missing you for longer than this trip. I keep wondering if you know if you've ever known, and I keep deciding that you probably don't. Because if you did, something would be different. And nothing has ever been different. So I think you don't know. I think I'm the only one who's been carrying this. And I'm tired, Daniel. I'm tired of missing someone who's right in front of me. I set the letter down. Olivia, I said, you don't have to, she started. Stop. I reached across the table. I put my hand over hers. Stop telling me what I don't have to do. I waited until she looked at me. I've been in love with you for years. I don't know exactly when it started. I just know that somewhere between that coffee cup exploding on our laptops and every phone call and every time you fixed something in this house and never mentioned it, I stopped, breathed. Somewhere in all of that, I fell completely in love with you. And I have spent a very long time pretending I hadn't. Because I was afraid that saying it out loud would ruin the one thing in my life I was most sure of. The kitchen was completely quiet. Olivia's hand turned over under mine. Her fingers closed around my hand. You are, she said. The most frustrating person I have ever known. I almost laughed. I know, 12 years, she said. Daniel. 12 years. I know. She shook her head, but she didn't let go of my hand, and neither did I. We sat in that kitchen for a long time. We talked the way people talk when they've been holding things back for too long, and the dam finally breaks all at once. Out of order, interrupting each other, going back and correcting things, laughing at moments that probably weren't funny but felt like relief needed somewhere to go. She told me about the night she'd almost called me from California to say it, about how she'd picked up the phone and put it down 4 times. I told her about the hotel room in Sacramento where I'd almost texted her something I'd eventually deleted, sentence by sentence, until there was nothing left. We were both, it turned out, very good at almost. But we were sitting in my kitchen now, and for the first time in 12 years, the thing that had been living in the space between us was finally out in the open. It didn't make everything simple. She still had New York. I still had the next project. And the one after that. She was still leaving, and I was still me, someone who'd built a whole life out of moving toward broken things in other cities, and hadn't fully figured out that the most important thing was right here in Charleston, sitting across a table, holding my hand, and shaking her head at 12 years of missed time. But none of that had to be solved in a morning. Some things I had learned from years of preservation work. You fix slowly, carefully, one layer at a time. You don't tear it down and start over. You work with what's there. You find the structure beneath the damage. You restore it to what it was always meant to be. That's what Olivia and I were going to have to do. And that morning, sitting in the kitchen of a house I'd been missing for 6 months, with a letter folded on the table between us and 12 years, finally breathing in the open air, I thought we had a pretty good chance. The coffee went cold between us. That's how long we sat there. Long enough for 2 full cups to go from hot to lukewarm, to something neither of us bothered to drink anymore. And still we kept talking. Still, we kept pulling threads out of 12 years and laying them on the table between us, like evidence in a case we'd both been building without realizing it. She told me about Marcus, her ex, the one whose breakup had wrecked her for nearly 2 months. She'd never told me the full story. I'd gotten pieces. The way you get pieces when someone is still too close to something to talk about it straight. But that morning, in my kitchen, she told me all of it. He knew, she said simply, about how I felt about you. He figured it out before I ever admitted it to myself. And that was the beginning of the end for us. Really. He said he couldn't compete with someone who wasn't even in the room. I stared at her. You never told me that. No. She turned her coffee mug in slow circles. I didn't. Why? She looked up. Because telling you would have meant admitting he was right. That landed somewhere deep and quiet in my chest. I thought about Marcus. I'd never particularly liked him, and I'd always felt a little guilty about that, a little too quick to find his flaws, a little too ready to take Olivia's side in every disagreement. I'd told myself it was just good friendship, loyalty. Now I sat with the possibility that it had been something else entirely. I owe that man an apology, I said. Olivia blinked. Then she laughed a short, surprised sound. What? He was right, and I was too blind to see what I was doing. I shook my head. I kept coming back. Every time something fell apart in my life, I came back to you, and I never thought about what that was costing you. She was quiet for a moment. It wasn't a cost, she said carefully. I chose it. Every time. She paused. But I think I needed you to choose it too. Not just arrive. Not just show up and assume I'd be there. She looked at me steadily. I needed you to know what you were choosing. I didn't have an answer for that. Not a fast one. The kind of answer that deserved came from somewhere slower and more honest. And I was still getting to it. So I said the only true thing I had. I'm still learning how to do that. She nodded once. I know then. That's actually the first thing you've said in 12 years that made me feel like we might be okay. I reached across the table again. She didn't pull back. We stayed like that for a while. Not talking. Just sitting in the same room, in the same house, with all the things we'd finally said, still settling around us like dust after a long renovation. It felt, strangely, like the beginning of something solid. But then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Something in her face shifted just slightly, just enough for me to catch it. What? I said. It's the firm. She turned the phone face down. They want an answer by Friday. Friday, 4 days away. And just like that, the morning cracked open. We weren't in some suspended moment anymore. We were back in the actual world, where she had a decision to make and a life to build, and a year-long contract waiting in a city 4 states away. And I had my own projects, my own next assignment, my own perpetually half-unpacked suitcase sitting by the front door. You said you'd already decided, I said. I have. She said it without hesitation. I'm going, Daniel. I nodded. But I needed you to know about us first. She met my eyes. I couldn't leave with all of that still sitting in a box, so you told me. So I told you. We looked at each other across the table. Okay, I said. She frowned slightly. Okay, you should go. It's the right move for your career. I know what you've been building toward, even if I should have paid closer attention along the way. And this is it. This is the one. I leaned back in my chair. I'm not going to be the reason you turn it down. She studied me for a long moment, like she was checking for fine print, checking to see if there was a condition buried somewhere in what I'd just said. What does that mean for? She gestured slightly between us. For this, I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I know that whatever we figure out, it doesn't start with you giving up the biggest opportunity of your career. That's not the foundation I want to build on. I paused. You told me I never asked what you were building toward. So I'm asking now, and I'm listening to the answer. Something in her face softened. Just at the edges. Just enough. You really mean that, she said, like she was surprised. I really mean it. She looked down at her coffee, then back up at me. This is going to be complicated. Everything worth doing is complicated. I smiled slightly. I restore buildings, Olivia. I've spent my whole career working with things that are structurally compromised and difficult and inconvenient. I'm not afraid of complicated. She shook her head, slowly. You're going to use architecture metaphors at me for the rest of my life, aren't you? Probably, I said, and she laughed, really laughed, the way she did when something caught her off guard and she couldn't quite help it. And I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been pulled tight for a very long time. We were going to be okay. I didn't know yet exactly what okay looked like. But I knew we were going to figure it out. What I didn't know, what I absolutely could not have anticipated, was what was going to happen next. 2 days later, everything blew up. Not between us. That would have been almost manageable. No, what blew up was the thing I hadn't even seen coming. The piece of the story I hadn't known existed. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to answer. Olivia had left her phone on my kitchen counter. She'd gone upstairs to work. She was still using the room, the shared workspace she'd built while I was away, and I hadn't asked her to change anything about it. We'd fallen into an easy pattern over those 2 days. She came in the morning. We had coffee. She worked, I worked. We ate dinner together and talked about the New York project and what her timeline looked like and how we were going to stay connected across the distance. It was good. Genuinely good. Better than most things I'd felt in years. And then her phone lit up on the counter. I wasn't going to answer it, obviously. I glanced at the screen to see if it was something she might need. The name on the screen was one I recognized. Ryan Holt. I knew that name. Not because Olivia had ever introduced us, she hadn't, but because she'd mentioned him. A few times, briefly. A colleague from a project she'd done last year. She'd said he was talented. She'd said they'd worked well together. I had filed that information away and moved on. The phone kept buzzing. I picked it up. I took it upstairs. I knocked on the door and handed it to her, without looking at the screen again. She looked at the name. Her expression didn't change. Not in any obvious way. But she said, very carefully, I'll call him back. Okay, I said. I went back downstairs. I told myself it was nothing. For about 40 minutes, I told myself that very convincingly. And then I heard her voice from upstairs, just the tone of it. Not the words, through the floor, and something in me went cold. Not jealousy. Exactly. Something more complicated than that. Something that felt like standing in front of a wall you thought was solid and suddenly realizing you can't quite see what's behind it. She came downstairs 20 minutes later. I was at my desk in the kitchen, working, or pretending to. She sat down across from me. She said, "I need to tell you something." I put down my pen. "Okay." She linked her fingers together on the table. This was her thinking gesture, the one that meant she was trying to find the right order for something. "Ryan is one of the senior partners on the New York project." "All right. He's the one who he was part of the team that reviewed my portfolio. He pushed for my name internally." She paused. "We've been talking about the project for about 2 months." 2 months, I repeated. Yes, I calculated that quietly. 2 months ago, I was still in California. 2 months ago, she was here, fielding calls from a senior partner at a major New York design firm who had gone to bat for her career. 2 months ago, this entire other storyline had already been in motion, and she hadn't told me any of it. "Is there something else?" I said. She looked at me directly. This was Olivia's way. When she had something hard to say, she didn't look away from it. She looked straight at you. "He asked me to dinner. When I get to New York." She said it cleanly. No softening, no spin. "He's been, it hasn't crossed a professional line. But there's an interest there. On his end." The kitchen was very quiet. "On his end?" "Yes. Just his end." She held my gaze. "I wouldn't have let you read that letter if the answer to that question was anything other than yes." I sat with that. She was right. And I knew she was right. And knowing she was right didn't entirely dissolve the cold, tight thing that had settled in my chest, because knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two entirely different experiences. And I was only just learning how to be honest about both at the same time. "Why are you telling me this?" I said. "Because you deserve to know. Because we just had the most honest conversation of our entire 12-year friendship, and I am not going back to keeping things from you." She leaned forward slightly. "And because I need you to understand that I am walking into New York with eyes open. I know what I'm choosing. I chose it before I knew where you and I stood. And now that I know," she stopped. "Now that I know, I'm still choosing it. But I wanted you to know everything." I stared at the table for a moment. Then I looked up. "Do you have feelings for him?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "No. But you could." A pause. Shorter than I expected. "I don't know. Maybe. If things were different." She held my gaze. "They're not different," I breathed. In the part of my life before that kitchen table conversation, I would have shut down here. I would have nodded and said something carefully neutral and let the conversation slide somewhere safer. I was very good at that. 12 years of practice. But I was trying, actively, in real time, to be different. "I need you to be honest with me," I said. "Not about him specifically, about us." I leaned forward. "If I hadn't come home early, if you'd gone to New York without this conversation ever happening, what would you have done that letter?" She was very still. "Olivia, I don't know," she said finally. "I'd been planning to. I thought about burning it. Honestly. Just putting it away for good." She exhaled slowly, "And then you walked through the door. And now?" "Now," she said, and her voice was quieter. "I want to figure out what we are before I go. Not assume. Not leave it floating. Actually figure it out." "So do I said. "But I need you to tell me something too." She sat back. "You said you've been in love with me for years. And I believe you. But love that stays quiet for 12 years, that's not just fear, Daniel. That's a habit. And habits don't break just because the feeling finally gets named." She looked at me carefully. "I need to know if you can actually change the habit. Not just feel differently. Act differently." That was the question. Not the feeling. The feeling had been there for years. The question was whether I could be a different kind of person than I'd been. Whether the man who had quietly treated the most important person in his life like a given, like something that would always be there when he chose to look at it, could actually learn to show up differently. I didn't give her a fast answer. She would have known it was hollow. Instead, I said, "I don't know yet. But I know I want to try. And I know the difference between that and just saying it." She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Then we try." That should have been the turning point. That should have been the moment where the hardest part was behind us. But then Thursday happened. Thursday was 3 days after I came home. 3 days after the letter and the kitchen table and all of it. And Thursday was the day Olivia's sister called me. Not Olivia. Her sister. Claire. Claire Bennett was 3 years older than Olivia. And she was the kind of person who called you directly when she had a problem, because she had decided you were going to help with it, whether you wanted to or not. She'd been like that the entire time I'd known She didn't say hello when I picked up. She said, "What did you say to her?" I paused. "Good morning, Claire." "Daniel, what did you say to Olivia? She called me last night, and she was I don't know. She sounded different. What happened?" I sat down on the porch step. We had a long conversation. About what? "That's probably something you should ask her." "I did ask her," she said. "Daniel came home and everything changed." And then she changed the subject. A short pause. "She's been in love with you for years, Daniel. I assume you know that now." "Claire, I'm her sister." "Of course I know." Her voice had dropped, gone quieter, and I realized with some surprise that she wasn't angry. She was worried. She has been holding that together for a very long time by herself. And now she's about to go to New York, which is the right call. "By the way, that job is exactly what she's needed, and I just need to know that you're not going to." She stopped. "Not going to what?" I said. "Make her feel like she has to choose." Claire's voice was flat and careful. "She will, you know. If you're not careful, she will walk away from that job because of you, even if you never ask her to. Because that's how she loves people. All the way or not at all. And if you're not serious, if you're just feeling things because she's leaving, and that made it real, then I need you to step back." The porch was quiet around me. "I'm serious," I said. "How serious?" I thought about the wall of photographs, about the letter, about 12 years of almost, about sitting in the kitchen and finally not looking away from it. "Serious enough to let her go to New York," I said. "Serious enough not to make her choice for her." I paused. "Serious enough to still be here when she comes back." A long silence on Claire's end. Then, "Okay. Just that." "Okay. She doesn't know I called," Claire said. "And you're not going to tell her?" "Probably not," I agreed. "Good." A pause. "For what it's worth, she lights up when she talks about you. Even when she's frustrated with you, which is often, there's still this thing in her voice." Claire stopped. I could hear her thinking. "Don't waste it, Daniel." She hung up. I sat on the porch step for a long time after that. Don't waste it. 12 years. I thought about everything I'd walked past without seeing it. Every moment I'd been in this house, and Olivia had been in it too, and I'd treated that as normal, as given, as something that would simply always be available when I got around to looking at it properly. The way you treat a building you own. The way you notice it every day and take it entirely for granted until the day you realize it's been quietly falling apart in the places you haven't looked. I'd spent my entire career learning to look at what other people missed, learning to find value in what had been overlooked, learning to restore what had been let go. I had been completely blind in my own house. That evening, Olivia came over for dinner. We cooked together her at the stove, me handling everything she handed me, an arrangement we'd fallen into years ago and never questioned. We talked about logistics, about New York timelines, about how often she'd be back in Charleston, about video calls and time zones, and whether her new apartment would have a decent workspace. We were building something, carefully, with full awareness of how fragile new things are before they've been tested. After dinner, we were sitting in the living room. She was on one end of the couch with her planner open. I was on the other end with a project file I was only pretending to read. She said, without looking up, "Are you going to tell me what you're thinking? Or are we going to do the thing where you go quiet, and I spend the next 4 hours trying to figure out what I missed?" I looked up. "Claire called me," I said. The planner lowered. "When?" "This morning." Olivia's expression was careful. "What did she say?" "She told me not to waste it." I held her gaze. She was right. Olivia stared at me for a moment. Then she shook her head, slowly, with something that looked like fond exasperation. "She called you. My sister actually called you. She loves you. She is a menace." But there was no heat in it. Just something warm and slightly rueful. She set the planner aside. "What did you tell her?" "That I'm serious." I shifted slightly on the couch to face her more directly. "And that I'm going to still be here when you get back." She looked at me for a long, quiet moment. "That's a year, Daniel," she said softly. "You've never committed to being anywhere for a year." I know. You've never. She stopped, started again. Every relationship you've had has eventually hit the wall of your schedule, of your projects, of the fact that you leave. She wasn't accusing me. She was being honest with me the same way I was trying to be honest with her. I need you to understand what you're actually promising. Not just now, when everything is new and we're sitting in a room that still smells like that coffee I made this morning. But in March, when you're on a job site in Ohio and I'm buried in a project that's running 2 months over and we haven't had a real conversation in 3 weeks. I thought about March. I made myself actually think about it, not the version where everything was easy, but the version she was describing. The actual work of it. The distance and the missed calls and the days when proximity to someone you love is the very thing you can't have. Still here, I said. She searched my face. Still here, I said again. I'm not promising it'll be easy. I'm promising I won't disappear. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She just looked at me with that expression she got, sometimes the one I'd spent years categorizing as thoughtfulness, but was now starting to recognize as something else entirely. Something more specific. Then she reached across the couch and took my hand again. We sat there for a long time. Her planner sat unopened on the cushion beside her. My project file sat forgotten on the side table. Outside, Charleston did its evening thing quiet and warm, and completely indifferent to the very large thing happening in my living room. At some point, she fell asleep on my couch. I sat there for a while, not moving, not wanting to disturb the particular stillness of it. The lamp was still on. Her planner had slid to the floor. Her hand was still loosely in mine. I thought about 12 years. I thought about all the evenings I'd come home from, somewhere far away, and she'd been here in this house, in this room, exactly like this, and I had somehow managed to look right past the thing that was plainly in front of me. I thought about what she'd said. About loving people all the way or not at all, I thought. That is exactly how I want to love her. And then I thought, I have no idea if I know how. But for the first time, I was willing to find out. I reached over carefully, turned off the lamp and didn't go anywhere. She was gone before I woke up. I found a note on the kitchen counter. 3 words, in her handwriting, on the back of a grocery receipt. Coffee's still warm. I stood there holding that paper for longer than I should have, because that was Olivia in 3 words. She hadn't written, I had a good time, or we'll talk later, or any of the things a person writes when they're performing a feeling. She'd written something practical and warm and entirely her, and somehow that was more intimate than anything we'd said out loud the night before. I poured the coffee. It was still warm. I stood at the kitchen counter, and I thought about what came next. That was the problem with finally saying the true thing. Once it's out, you can't go back to the comfortable fiction. You can't pretend you don't know what you know. And what I knew now was that I had 10 days before Olivia left for New York, that I had spent 12 years being the person who's arrived and departed on his own schedule without fully accounting for the person he was leaving behind. And that if I wanted anything to be different, the difference had to start now. Not when she came back, now. So I did something I'd never done before in my professional life. I called my project coordinator and told him I needed 30 days before my next assignment. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You never take personal time, he said. I know. A Providence project is going to want you on site by the 15th. Push it, I said. Tell them I'll be there on the 22nd. I need 3 weeks here. Another pause. Everything okay? Daniel? Getting there, I said. And meant it. I hung up and stared at my phone for a moment. 3 weeks. I had never voluntarily stayed in one place for 3 weeks without a project driving it. The idea felt slightly foreign, like a jacket that didn't quite fit yet. But I put it on anyway. That afternoon, Olivia called. I heard you postponed the Providence job, she said, without preamble. I blinked. How did you hear that? Your coordinator called my cell. He has my number from when he used to coordinate your house checks through me. A beat. He wanted to know if you were sick. I laughed despite myself. What did you tell him? I told him you were fine. A short pause. Are you fine? I'm better than I've been in a while, I said, honestly. I pushed the job so I could be here. While you're still here. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Daniel, you didn't have to do that. I wanted to. I sat down. Don't argue with me about it. I'm not arguing. She stopped. This is new. I know it's new. You've never done this before. Stayed because of me. I know that too. I let that sit for a second. I'm sorry it took this long. She didn't say anything right away. When she did, her voice was quieter than I expected. Dinner tonight? I'll cook. You'll burn it. I'll cook and you'll supervise. She laughed. And just like that, the tension broke open into something lighter. Something that felt almost normal, except nothing between us was entirely normal anymore. And we were both aware of that, and neither of us wanted to say so out loud, because naming it felt like it might change its shape. I cooked, she supervised. We burned exactly one thing, the garlic bread, which I maintain was not my fault, and ate at the kitchen table with the window open and the evening coming in soft and warm off the street outside. And we talked. Not about the big things, we'd done enough of that. We talked the way old friends talk, about her college roommate who had just gotten divorced for the second time, about a restoration project I'd read about in New Mexico that had gone spectacularly wrong because nobody had checked the foundation, about the time in our sophomore year when we'd gotten spectacularly lost driving to a concert 4 hours away and ended up eating breakfast food at 2 in the morning in a truck stop diner in the middle of nowhere, laughing until our sides hurt. I still have the photo from that night, she said. You have photos from everything. Someone has to document things. You're useless at it. I send you project photos. Buildings, Daniel. You send me pictures of buildings. She pointed her fork at me. Never once have you sent me a picture of yourself. I opened my mouth to respond. She raised an eyebrow. I closed my mouth. She grinned. That's what I thought. I pointed at the garlic bread. You burned that. I want that on the record. I watched you burn it in real time and I tried to warn you, and you told me you had it under control. I had it under control. It was on fire. Controlled fire. She laughed again. This time it reached her eyes the way it always did when something hits her in exactly the right place, a brightness that started there and moved through her whole face. And I sat across the table and watched it happen and thought, how did I look at this for 12 years and tell myself it was just friendship? How did I convince myself that this was ordinary? We did this every night for the next 6 days. Sometimes at my place, sometimes at hers. We cooked badly and walked in the evenings and drove to the coast on Saturday because she said she needed to see the water before she left and she wanted company for it. We sat on a blanket and watched the sun go down and she leaned against my shoulder. And I didn't move for 45 minutes because I didn't want to disturb it. It was the best week I'd had in years. And underneath all of it, ticking steadily, was the countdown. 10 days, 9, 8, 7. On day 6, everything shifted again. I was at my desk in the shared workspace, our workspace, when she came in and sat down at her table without speaking. This was normal. We'd both discovered that we worked well in the same room, which shouldn't have surprised either of us because we'd always operated on the same frequency. But somehow having the actual proof of it was still striking. I gave her about 20 minutes. Then I looked up. She was staring at her design board. Her pen was in her hand, but she hadn't used it. Her coffee was untouched. What happened? I said. She looked at me. Ryan emailed, she said. Something tightened in my chest. Not jealousy, or not only that. Something more complicated. The specific anxiety of knowing that a situation exists in which the person you love is surrounded by people who have every reason to care about her, and you are going to be very far away. What did he say? I kept my voice even. He sent the full project brief, the scope, the timeline, the team breakdown. She paused. He also said he's looking forward to working closely with me. She said the last sentence in a specific flat tone that told me she'd noticed the word closely and had been sitting with it. How do you feel about that? I asked. Professionally, it's an incredible opportunity. He's one of the best in the industry. I would learn a lot. She set the pen down. Personally? Yeah, personally. I am aware that I'm about to spend 12 months in a city where I don't know many people, working very long hours on a high-pressure project, alongside someone who has made it fairly clear he's interested in me. She met my gaze, and I'm leaving behind the person I actually want to be with, who has a habit of disappearing into work projects for months at a time. The room was very quiet. I'm not going to disappear, I said. You say that now. I'm saying it now because I mean it now. And I'll still mean it in March. I leaned forward. Olivia, look at me. She did. I'm not going to pretend I'm not worried. I'd be lying if I said the Ryan situation doesn't. I stopped. Chose better words. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't aware of it. But I'm not going to ask you to manage my anxiety at the expense of your career. That's not fair to you. I paused. What I am going to ask is that you're honest with me. If something changes, if anything changes, you tell me. Not because I need to control it. Because I'd rather know than not know. She was watching me carefully. You'd rather know even if it's something hard? Especially if it's something hard. She considered that for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once slowly. Okay. Same rules for you. If you're struggling, if the distance gets to you, if something happens, if you start shutting down the way you do, you tell me. You don't just go quiet and hope I don't notice. Deal. I mean it, Daniel. The silent thing is your worst habit. Worse than the burning garlic bread. I understood the first time. I'm saying it twice for emphasis. Noted. I held her gaze. Twice noted. The corner of her mouth moved, just slightly. We went back to work. That afternoon, something happened that I didn't see coming. Not even a little. Her phone rang. She picked up. I wasn't paying attention. I was deep in a set of structural drawings for a building in Massachusetts that my team had sent over for review. I heard her voice in the background. Professional and warm. The way she always was with clients. And then the tone changed. I looked up. She had stood up from her chair. Her back was to me. Her shoulders had gone tight in the specific way they did when she was trying not to react to something. I waited. She hung up. She stood there with her back to me for about 5 full seconds. Then she turned around. That was the firm, she said. HR. Specifically. I set down my pencil. Okay. There's been a complication with the apartment they arranged for me in New York. What kind of complication? The lease fell through. The subletter backed out this morning. She rubbed the back of her neck. They're working on alternatives. But the lead time is short and the options are. She stopped. Ryan offered his spare room. The words sit in the air between us. I looked at her. She looked at me. He offered it as a short-term option, she said. Just until HR sorts out another placement. He said it would be a few weeks at most. What did you say? I told them I'd figure out my own situation. She said it without hesitation. I didn't even consider it, Daniel. I just want you to know that. I breathed. Thank you for telling me, I said. I told you I would. She crossed her arms. I'm going to call a couple of people I know in the city. Someone will have a lead on something short-term. She pulled up her phone. It'll be fine. I watched her start making calls. Efficient. Focused, entirely in command of the situation. This was Olivia in problem-solving mode, no drama. No wasted motion. Just clear and direct and capable. I thought. I spent 12 years thinking I was the one who held things together. Who managed things. Who solved the logistical problems. And here she was, handling a housing crisis in a city she hadn't moved to yet, with complete composure, while I sat in her workspace, feeling slightly humbled. She found a sublet by 4 o'clock that afternoon. A friend of a colleague. A studio in Brooklyn, available the exact week she needed it. She confirmed it, paid the deposit, sent the paperwork, and turned back to her design board. Sorted, she said simply. You did that in 2 hours. I'm good at solving problems. She glanced at me sideways. I've had a lot of practice, living adjacent to your life. That one stung, gently. But it stung. I know, I said. I'm not trying to. You're right. I know. I put down the drawings. You've been solving problems in the margins of my life for a long time. And I benefited from it without being conscious of what it cost you. I looked at her. I see it now. She held my gaze for a moment. You're doing the thing again. What thing? The thing where you say something so honest and direct that I don't have a counter-argument. And it's very irritating. I almost smiled. Good. She shook her head. But she turned back to her design board. And I could see by the line of her shoulders that something had settled. That evening, 4 days before she left, I did something I hadn't planned. I went upstairs after she'd gone home. I stood in the doorway of our workspace, For a long time, the photographs on the wall, the pinned tickets and postcards, and the folded note I'd slipped under her door. The two desks side by side. The bookshelf, with her design references lined up next to my restoration manuals. It had started as her project. Something she'd built quietly, over 6 months, in a room she'd been given permission to use, and it had ended up being the most honest thing about us. More honest than anything we'd said in 12 years. I went downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table. I opened my laptop, and I started writing. Not a project report, not a structural assessment. I wrote a letter, longhand first, on paper, the way I hadn't written anything since I was in college, because some things need to be written by hand, or they don't feel real. I wrote about the wall of photographs, about what it meant to walk into a room and see your own life reflected back at you through someone else's eyes and realize it looked better that way. I wrote about the coffee she made, that was always still warm, about the note she'd left on a grocery receipt, about the garlic bread and the truck stop diner and every ordinary moment I'd spent in her company that I hadn't properly valued while it was happening. I wrote about what I was afraid of. That was the hardest part. I'm not good at naming fears directly. I'd spent most of my adult life converting fear into action, which meant I was very productive and also not particularly self-aware. But sitting alone in my kitchen, writing a letter I wasn't sure I was going to give her, I tried. I wrote, "I'm afraid you'll go to New York and build a life that doesn't have room for a man who spent 12 years failing to see what was right in front of him. I'm afraid I've started too late. I'm afraid that loving you in theory is something I've always been capable of, and loving you in practice is something I haven't proven yet." I wrote, "I'm afraid I'll disappoint you. Not dramatically, quietly. The way I've always done things, just drifting slightly, just being slightly less present than you needed, until one day you look up and realize the distance has become permanent." I wrote, "I don't want to be that person. I don't know yet if I'm capable of being someone different. But I want to try. And I think wanting it, this much is new. I think this is the first time I've ever wanted something enough to be genuinely afraid of losing it." I sealed the letter in an envelope. I put it in the wooden box, her wooden box, the one she'd kept on the work table with my name on it, the one that had held her letter to me, the letter that had started all of this. I put my letter in it, and I put the box back on the work table upstairs. She found it the next morning. I was downstairs making coffee when I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She'd come in while I was still half asleep, with her key and without knocking, the way she always had, and then I heard her stop. At the top of the stairs, just stopped. I waited. After a long moment, I heard her come back down. She came into the kitchen. She had the box in her hands. She set it on the counter. She looked at me. Her eyes were bright in a way that was different from how they'd been the night we'd had it all out at the table. This was something else, something quieter and deeper. "You read my letter," she said. "Not an accusation, just a fact." "Yes." "And then you wrote one back." "Yes." She looked at the box, then at me. "Can I read it now, or should I wait until I'm on the plane and need something to ugly cry about at altitude?" "Now or later," I said. "It says the same thing either way." She took the box upstairs. I finished making the coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, and I waited. When she came back down, she didn't say anything right away. She just sat across from me, in the same chair she always sat in, and wrapped her hands around the mug I'd poured for her. "After a while," she said, "the part about being afraid, yeah. I didn't know you got afraid," she said. "In all the time I've known you, you've always seemed like someone who just moves forward, just picks up and goes. I move forward because staying still scares me," I said. "That's not the same thing as not being afraid." I looked at her. "I've been afraid this whole time. I was just afraid of the wrong things." She thought about that. "What were you afraid of?" she asked. "Ruining it," I said simply. "You were the one thing in my life that worked, that was stable and real and mine, and I was terrified that if I touched it, if I changed what it was, I'd break it. So instead you let it stay incomplete." "Yes." She looked at her coffee. "That's the most heartbreaking thing you've ever said to me." "I know, because I was doing the exact same thing," she said quietly. "I was protecting the friendship by never asking for more. And in doing that, she stopped. I was settling. Not because you're a consolation prize. Because I was afraid to want what I actually wanted. We sat with that for a moment. Two people who had spent 12 years protecting the same thing in exactly the same way. From each other. Out of the same fear. We were both idiots, I said. She looked up. Absolute idiots. In our defense. There is no defense. Daniel. 12 years is a long time to be an idiot? I was going to say cautious. You were an idiot and I was an idiot, and we wasted a lot of good time. She said it matter-of-factly. Without heat. Just the plain truth. And now I'm leaving in 4 days. You're leaving in 4 days, I confirmed. And we're going to try to make this work across 1,000 miles. Yes. She looked at me steadily. Are you scared? Terrified, I said without hesitation. Something moved through her face. Relief. Maybe. Or recognition. Like hearing a fear named out loud made it smaller. Good, she said. Me too. She reached across the table. That means we're both paying attention this time. 3 days before she left, Claire came to town. I didn't know she was coming. Neither. I think did Olivia, or if she did. She hadn't mentioned it. I opened my front door on a Wednesday morning to find Claire Bennett standing on my porch with a coffee in each hand and the expression of someone who had things to say and had allocated the morning for it. I figured I owed you a conversation in person, she said, handing me one of the coffees. Since I ambushed you by phone, I stepped back to let her in. How long are you here? 2 days. I'm taking Olivia to dinner tonight. But first, she walked into my kitchen, looked around, sat down in the chair that was apparently becoming the official chair for significant conversations in my life. I want to know where your head is. I sat across from her. My head is clear, I said. Clearer than it's been in a long time. She studied me with the particular precision that ran in that family. Olivia did it too, that measuring look that didn't miss much. She told me about the letter, Claire said. I figured she might. She cried. She said it simply. Not sad crying. The other kind. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. I've watched my sister be in love with you for years. Daniel. I've watched her manage it, and redirect it, and file it away, so that she couldn't keep being your friend, because your friendship was important to her, and she was afraid of losing it. She paused. Do you understand what that took? More than I probably deserved, I said. Much more, she agreed. Not unkindly. She's one of the strongest people I know. But she has a limit, and I spent years watching her approach it. She looked at me. She's not approaching it anymore. Whatever you said to her this week, whatever actually happened in this house, it changed something. She paused. Don't undo it. I'm not going to undo it. Long distance is hard. You know that. You've been living at a distance from everything important for years. She said it without cruelty. Don't let that become the template. It won't be. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay. You do that, I said. You and Olivia both. You say okay like it's the end of a contract negotiation. She almost smiled. Runs in the family. It does, I agreed. She left after an hour. Olivia came by that afternoon. The three of us had dinner together that evening at a restaurant on King Street Easy. Loud, the kind of dinner where the conversation never quite settles in one place, but somehow covers everything important before the check arrives. At the end of the night, standing on the sidewalk outside, Claire pulled me into a hug that surprised me with its fierceness. Take care of her, she said quietly. Even from far away, I will, I said, and meant every syllable. 2 days before Olivia left, we had our first real fight. Not the big emotional reckoning from the kitchen table. An actual fight, sharp and fast and painful, in the way that first real fights always are, when they come after a period of careful, intentional tenderness. It started over nothing. The way real fights always start. She made an offhand comment about my project in Massachusetts, something about how long it was going to run, and whether I'd thought through the timeline. I said something defensive. She pushed back. I said something sharper than I meant to. She went very still. Do you hear yourself? She said. I'm just saying. You're shutting down. Right now. Mid-conversation. She kept her voice even, but her eyes were direct. This is the thing I was talking about. This is exactly it. I stopped. She was right. I could feel it happening in real time, the slight withdrawal, the defensive posture, the conversational move, that looked like reasonableness, but was actually a form of self-protection. I'd done it my whole life. I'd just never been with someone who could name it while it was happening. You're right, I said. Don't just agree with me to stop the fight. I'm not. I made myself slow down. I got defensive. The Massachusetts timeline is actually a sore spot, because I'm behind on the planning and I know it, and when you mentioned it, I deflected instead of just saying that. I looked at her. I'm sorry. She studied me. See, she said finally. That's what I need. Not perfection. Just honesty. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it makes me look like I don't have things together. Especially then. She crossed her arms. I don't need you to have everything together. I need you to be real with me. I nodded. She uncrossed her arms. Okay, I'm going to keep doing the thing, I said. Not on purpose, but I'm wired a certain way. I know. And you're going to have to call it out sometimes. I know that too. She tilted her head slightly. I've been calling it out for 12 years. I'm basically an expert. That's either reassuring or horrifying. Probably both, she said. We didn't make up dramatically. We just moved back toward each other. The way you do when two people have decided that the fight is less important than what's on the other side of it. We made tea. We sat on the couch. She put her feet up on the coffee table, which she always did, and which I always pretended to mind and didn't. One more day, she said. To no one in particular. One more day, I confirmed. She looked at me sideways. Are you going to come to the airport? Obviously. You don't have to. Olivia. I'm just saying, it might be I'm coming to the airport. She pressed her lips together. But she was fighting a smile. Okay, twice noted, I said. She laughed, and I felt that loosening in my chest again. The one that happened every time she laughed and meant it. I thought, I'm going to hear that laugh on the phone for a year. I'm going to hear it through a screen, with bad audio, in hotel rooms and on job sites, at times when the distance will feel very large and very real. I thought, it's still going to be worth it. Her last night in Charleston. She stayed late. We didn't plan it that way. We just kept talking. Kept moving from one corner of the house to another, the way you do when you don't want an evening to end. She walked through every room slowly, touching things. The original woodwork in the hallway, the old plaster walls in the bedroom, the kitchen tiles I'd sourced from an estate sale 3 years ago because they were historically accurate and also beautiful. I love this house, she said simply. I know you do. She turned to look at me. I put a lot of myself into it. While you were gone. I know that now. I didn't do it, I wasn't trying to stake a claim or anything. She looked at the wall. When I was here, I felt close to you. And I needed that. So I made the space feel more like both of us. I stood in front of her. You always had a claim, I said. I was just slow to say so. She looked up at me. And then she did something she'd never done before in 12 years of friendship. She put both her hands flat against my chest. Not a hug, not a reach. Just her hands on my chest, feeling whatever was there, and her eyes finding mine. Don't be slow this time, she said. I won't be, I said. I meant it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. She left the next morning before sunrise. She had an early flight and a car already booked, and a year of her life waiting for her in a city full of possibility. She hugged me at the door long, tight. The kind of hug that tries several months of distance in advance. She smelled like cedar and coffee, and the particular warmth of someone you've known so long they've become part of what home means. Call me when you land, I said. You'll be asleep. Call me anyway. She pulled back, looked at me, put her hand against my jaw for just a moment, just one moment, and then she turned and walked to the car. I stood on the porch until the car turned the corner and was gone. The house was very quiet. I went upstairs. I stood in the doorway of our workspace. The photographs on the wall, the 2 desks, the letter, now answered, sitting in the wooden box on her work table. I thought, she's going to come back to this room. I thought, I'm going to make sure it's worth coming back to. I went downstairs. I made coffee. I picked up my phone. And for the first time in 12 years, I sent her a message that said exactly what I meant, without editing it down, without making it smaller so it was safer. I wrote, I love you. Travel safe. The room is yours when you come home. 3 minutes later, from somewhere in a car, on the way to the airport, My phone lit up. She sent back 3 words. Coffee will be warm. I laughed. I sat down at my kitchen table, and I started figuring out how to be someone who stays. She called at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was already awake. Sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee, staring at my phone like that would make it ring faster. I'd been up since 5. I hadn't slept well. The house had that specific, heavy quiet that settles in after someone leaves it. The kind that's different from ordinary silence, because you can feel the shape of the person who's no longer there. I landed, she said. Her voice was tired. Travel tired. The particular flatness that comes from 2 early mornings and recycled air, and the disorientation of arriving somewhere new. How was the flight, I said. Turbulent over Virginia. I spilled half my water on the man next to me. He was very gracious about it. A pause. New York smells like exhaust and ambition. That's accurate. The studio is small. Another pause. It's fine. It's temporary. It doesn't have to be perfect. I know. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear movement on her end wheels on pavement. The muffled sounds of a city waking up. I keep thinking about the room. The workspace? Our workspace. She said the word our with a specific emphasis, like she was testing how it sounded, like she was deciding to keep it. I thought about it. The whole flight, how it felt to walk into it and have it actually feel like somewhere I belonged. It's still there, I said. Exactly the way you left it. You didn't move anything? Not a single photograph, she exhaled. And in that exhale was something I recognized: relief. The specific relief of knowing that the thing you left behind is still intact. Okay, she said softly. Okay, good. We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes without saying much, just existing on the line together while she navigated to her sublet, and I sat in my kitchen, and the sun came up over Charleston. It was the most comfortable silence I'd ever sat in. When she finally said she had to go, I said, "Call me tonight, it might be late. Call me anyway." A small pause. "You said that at the airport." "I meant it at the airport." She made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something warmer. "Okay, Daniel." Then she hung up. I sat with the quiet for a minute. Then I stood up, poured the cold coffee down the drain, made a fresh pot, and got to work. That was how the first 2 weeks went. Calls in the morning, text throughout the day, longer calls at night, when she'd gotten back to the studio and had the time and the privacy to actually talk. She told me about the project, the scale of it, the complexity, the specific pressure of walking into a room full of seasoned professionals as the new creative director, and knowing that every single person in that room was watching to see if she could carry it. She could. I knew that before she did. Ryan ran the first team meeting, she said. One evening toward the end of the second week, I was in the middle of reviewing drawings for the Providence project. I'd finally gone up there, 4 days after she left. Because the work didn't stop just because my personal life had finally started. I set my pencil down when she said his name. Not dramatically. Just set it down. "How was it?" I said. "Professional. He's good. Really good." She paused. "He's also been very careful to keep things professional," which I noticed and appreciated. "Has he said anything?" "He took me to lunch with 3 other people from the team, very group context." Another pause. "He's not pushing anything, Daniel. I think he got the message." "What message did he get?" "Probably the one where I talked about you twice in the first hour of the first team meeting." She sounded slightly amused. "Not on purpose. It just came up. Someone asked if I had connections in Charleston's preservation community, and I mentioned you. And then someone asked how I knew you, and I said you were." She stopped. "What did you say?" "I said you were the person I was building a life with." The Providence drawings in front of me went slightly out of focus. "You said that?" I said. "Is that okay, Olivia?" I put my hand over my face for a second. "Of course it's okay. I just wasn't expecting, I know." "I wasn't either. It just came out." She paused. It felt true, so I said it. I sat with that for a moment. The person I was building a life with, said out loud, in a conference room in New York, to a group of strangers. As a plain fact. "It is true," I said. "Good." Her voice was warm. "Now tell me about Providence. You've been evasive about it for 3 days." I picked my pencil back up. The foundation is worse than the preliminary assessment suggested, I said. We've got a significant moisture issue in the east wall, and the original contractor used materials I'd generously describe as questionable. I've been arguing with the structural engineer every day this week. Are you winning? Define winning. Is the building going to fall down? Not on my watch. She laughed. It's extremely you. The building has been standing since 1894. I'm not going to be the one who loses it. No, she said, you're not. And there was something in her voice when she said it. Something steady and specific that made me understand she wasn't just talking about the building. We hung up a little after 11. I went to sleep in a hotel room in Providence with my phone on the pillow beside me, which was something I'd never done before in my professional life and which I was going to continue doing and not mention to anyone. Week 3 was when it got harder. I was deep in the Providence project, and she was deep in hers, and the overlap between our schedules started to narrow in ways that were difficult to predict or manage. She had site visits that ran late. I had contractor disputes that ate entire afternoons. We'd planned to call at 7, and one of us would send a text at 9 saying sorry. Something came up. Tomorrow? Tomorrow always happened. But the gaps started to accumulate. I noticed it, the way you notice a hairline crack in a wall, not all at once. Not dramatically, just gradually becoming aware of something that needs attention. On a Thursday in the 4th week, I called her at 8. She didn't pick up. I texted. She replied 2 hours later. Long day, really long. Talk tomorrow, I said. Of course. And I meant it. And also, I sat in my hotel room for an hour being aware of how large the space between Rhode Island and New York felt. The next morning I called. She picked up on the second ring. I missed you yesterday, she said. Before I could say anything. Not an apology. Not an excuse. Just a direct statement. I know, I said. I felt it. Tell me that's not going to turn into resentment, she said. It won't. You sound certain. I'm choosing to be certain, I said. There's a difference. Certainty isn't always something you feel. Sometimes it's something you decide. A pause. That might be the most grown-up thing you've said in 12 years. I've been practicing, I can tell. A beat, I'm really tired. I know. New city, new team. High-pressure project. That's a lot. It's more than that. She was quiet for a moment. I'm tired of I miss having someone in the same room as me. I miss being somewhere familiar. She paused. I miss you. Specifically and concretely. Not in a way I can fix with a phone call. I understood that. I felt it too. But something else registered beneath the words. Something in her tone that was slightly different from what I expected. What happened? I said. Nothing specific, Olivia. A pause. Ryan asked me to dinner, just the two of us. Last night. The hotel room felt very still. What did you say? I asked. I said no. Immediately. Obviously, I said no. But the fact that he asked meant I had to have a conversation I didn't want to have. About where things stood. About you. About why it wasn't going to happen. She exhaled, and having that conversation made everything feel more real. The distance. The difficulty. The fact that I am in a city where I don't know anyone except people I work with. And the person I actually want to talk to is in Rhode Island, and this is going to be the situation. For the next 10 months, I breathed. I wanted to say the reassuring thing. The smooth thing. The thing that made it all sound manageable. But I'd promised her honesty. And that meant honoring the hard version of things as much as the easy version. It's real, I said. It is hard. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. I paused. But I need you to tell me something honestly. What? Did you want to say yes? The silence that followed was very specific. The kind that's not empty. The kind that's full of something being carefully located and examined before it's put into words. No, she said. And then, but I noticed that he asked. And I noticed that noticing it made me feel guilty. And the guilt told me something. What did it tell you? That even a small amount of attention from someone physically present felt significant. In a way that worried me. She said it plainly, without softening. This was what she'd promised me. This was the honesty we'd agreed to. I'm not saying I'm interested in him. I'm saying I'm human, and I'm lonely, and being lonely is information. My chest was tight. Not with jealousy. Exactly. with something more like being handed a problem I wasn't sure I knew how to solve. "What do you need?" I said. "I don't know yet. Take a guess." She was quiet for a moment. "I think I need you to show up. Not physically, I know you can't do that. But in some way that reminds me that this is real, that you're real, that I'm not just maintaining a long-distance arrangement with someone I once had a conversation with in a kitchen. You think this might not be real. I think," she said carefully, "that real things need tending, and we've both been very busy." She was right. That was the exact right word. Tending. The thing you do with something valuable and alive. You don't just believe in it and hope it sustains itself. You water it. You check on it. You give it what it needs on the days when giving feels inconvenient. "I hear you," I said. "Give me 24 hours. 24 hours. Trust me." A pause. "Okay." I hung up. I sat in the hotel room for 10 minutes. Completely still. Then I opened my laptop. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone with my project team, my coordinator, and the Providence City liaison. I restructured the next 2 weeks of site visits so I could consolidate 4 days of work into 2.5. My structural engineer was not happy. My coordinator thought I'd lost my mind. The city liaison said, and I quote Mr. Walker, "This is highly irregular," I said. "Yes, it is. Can we make it work?" He said, "I'll see what I can do." I booked a train to New York for Friday evening. I didn't tell Olivia. On Friday afternoon, I texted her, "Are you free Saturday morning?" She replied 20 minutes later, "I have a site visit at 2. Morning should be free." "Why?" I wrote back, "Make sure you eat breakfast." "I'll explain later." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, "You're being mysterious," I wrote, for once. Saturday morning, I knocked on the door of her Brooklyn sublet at 8:15 with 2 coffees and a paper bag from the bakery on the corner that a concierge at my hotel had insisted was non-negotiable. She opened the door. She stared at me. I held up the coffees. "Still warm," I said. She stood in the doorway for a full 3 seconds without speaking. And then she stepped forward and put her arms around me and held on with the particular fierceness of someone who has been holding themselves together more tightly than they let on. I held her back. Just as tightly. Maybe more. "You got on a train," she said. Into my shoulder. "I reorganized 4 days of site visits. Your structural engineer must be furious." Moderately. I felt her laugh against my shoulder. "I can be back by Sunday night. That gives us today and tomorrow morning." She pulled back. Her eyes were bright. That particular brightness. "You came," she said. Like it was a fact she was still verifying. "I told you I'd show up," I said. I meant it. We drank the coffee on her fire escape. We talked the way we'd talked that first morning at my kitchen table. Everything at once. Out of order. Covering ground quickly and then doubling back. She told me about the project in more detail than she'd been able to convey over the phone. Showed me sketches on her laptop, talked me through the decisions she'd been wrestling with, lit up the way she always did when she was deep in something that genuinely challenged her. I watched her face while she talked and thought, this is what I almost missed. This specific thing. This version of her that exists when she's doing exactly what she's supposed to be doing. Around noon, she said, "Tell me about the building." "Which one?" "Providence, the one that keeps stealing you." I told her. All of it, the foundation issues, the structural argument, the moisture problem in the east wall that was turning into a bigger conversation about the integrity of the whole structure. I told her about the contractor who kept trying to use modern solutions for historical problems and the city liaison who'd grown on me despite himself. She listened the way she always did, fully, tracking everything, asking the right questions at exactly the right moments. At one point she said, "The east wall problem. Is it the material or the drainage?" "Both, probably. The original builder used a lime mortar that's deteriorated significantly. But the drainage along the east foundation was regraded sometime in the 70s and it's directing water directly toward the base." She thought for a moment. "So you fix the drainage first. Otherwise, anything you do to the wall is just buying time." I looked at her. "That's what my structural engineer said." "Your structural engineer is right. I know. I'm arguing for a specific mortar composition that the city is being resistant about, and it's harder to have that fight when the underlying drainage problem is unresolved. So resolve the drainage. The drainage contractor is Daniel. She gave me a look. Solve the problem in the right order. You know this. I stopped. She was right. And the reason I hadn't done it was because I'd been so focused on the preservation argument that I'd been letting the infrastructure problem wait. Classic mistake. The kind you made when you were too deep inside a problem to see its shape clearly. You just diagnosed a construction issue in 20 minutes, I said. You were talking it through. Sometimes that's all it takes. She shrugged. Plus, I've been listening to you describe buildings for 12 years. I know how you think. I stared at her for a moment. Marry me, I said. She blinked. Then she threw a piece of croissant at me. Don't do that, I'm serious. You are not serious. You just solved a problem and you're in a good mood. I'm serious and I'm in a good mood. Those aren't mutually exclusive. I looked at her steadily. I'm not saying right now. I'm not saying you have to answer right now. I'm just saying it's a real thing that I'm actually thinking about. She looked at me for a long time. We've been together for a month, Daniel. We've been together for 12 years. The romantic part has been a month. She opened her mouth, closed it. I'm not asking you to decide anything today, I said. I'm just putting it on the table. So you know it's there. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you know what the most terrifying part of that is? What? It doesn't scare me. She met my eyes. It should feel too fast, and it doesn't. I reached across the fire escape railing and took her hand. I know, I said. She shook her head slowly. You came all the way to Brooklyn to bring me coffee and accidentally propose. I didn't accidentally propose. I very deliberately put it on the table. You are genuinely the strangest man I have ever known. You've known me for 12 years. This isn't new information. She laughed. Really laughed. And I held her hand on the fire escape in Brooklyn while the city moved around us below and thought, this is what I was protecting when I stayed quiet for 12 years. And it turns out the only thing I needed to do to protect it was say the true thing out loud. We had that whole day. We walked until her site visit, and I went back to the sublet and worked on the Providence drainage solution until she came back in the early evening with takeout and the slightly flushed, energized look she got when a site visit had gone well. How'd it go? I said. The client wants to rethink the entire color story for the third floor. She set the bags down. I talked them out of it. How? I told them the bones of the space were doing a specific thing, and covering it in a different color was like pieing over original brickwork. She said it deliberately. I might have borrowed that analogy from someone. That's a good analogy. I thought so. She opened takeout containers. Your structural engineer called my cell, by the way. I looked up sharply. What? He wanted to know where you were. I told him you were in New York for the weekend and would be back Sunday. She handed me a container. He said, and I'm quoting, "Tell him the drainage contractor confirmed availability for Tuesday. And tell him his girlfriend is apparently more organized than he is." I stared at her. She smiled. I may have also texted him the drainage solution while you were out. You texted my structural engineer. He seemed like someone who appreciated direct communication. He's going to think I can't manage my own project. Or he's going to think you have excellent people in your corner. She sat down. Either way, your Tuesday problem is solved. I looked at her across the takeout containers. You, I said, are remarkable. I know, she said simply. Sunday morning came too fast. It always does, when you're somewhere you want to stay. She walked me to the subway. We stood at the entrance for a moment, one of those city moments where the world keeps moving around two people who are standing still. Thank you for coming, she said. Thank you for needing me to. She tilted her head. Is that a complaint? It's the opposite of a complaint. I looked at her. You told me when the distance was getting to you. You were honest about it instead of managing it until it became something bigger. That's what we said we'd do. We're learning, she said. We are. She put her hand against my jaw. The same gesture from the morning she'd left Charleston. It hit me the same way it had, then somewhere deep and specific, the way the right thing always does. Come back soon, she said. 2 weeks. I'll have the Providence phase wrapped enough to take a weekend. 2 weeks, she confirmed. I kissed her, right there at the subway entrance, with the city streaming past us and Sunday morning being loud and indifferent around us. She pulled back. Her eyes were warm. "Go fix your building," she said. "Go design yours," I said. I went down the stairs. At the bottom, I looked back up. She was still there, looking down at me, and she raised one hand, not a wave. Exactly. Just an acknowledgement. A small, specific gesture that said, "I see you. I'll be here." I raised mine back. Then I turned and walked toward the train. On the ride back to Providence, I thought about what she'd said on the fire escape, that it should feel too fast, and it didn't. I sat with that. 12 years of knowing someone. Really knowing them, not the performance of them, not the version they show at parties and in professional settings, but the actual person, the one who throws food at you when you say something that catches her off guard and diagnoses your construction problems, and texts your structural engineer because she could see the solution clearly and didn't see any reason to wait 12 years. Of that changes the math on what feels fast. We weren't starting from zero. We were finally starting from where we actually were. When I got back to Providence that evening, there was a message from my coordinator. A new project inquiry. A 19th century warehouse in Savannah, Georgia, that a development group wanted to convert. Significant scope. 6 to 8 months, potentially. The kind of project I would normally have said yes to before the question was finished being asked. I sat with it for a long time. Then I called Olivia. "There's a project in Savannah," I said, when she picked up. "How big?" 6 to 8 months, probably. "When?" "They want to start conversations in about 6 weeks. Which means it would overlap with the back half of my New York project." She understood immediately. She always did. "Yes." I paused. "I want to talk to you about it before I respond." She was quiet for a moment. "Say that again," she said. "I want to talk to you about it before I—" "No. I heard you. I just a pause. In 12 years, Daniel, you have never once consulted me about a project before accepting it. I knew that. That was exactly why I was doing it. It affects both of us," I said. "That means it's not just my decision." Another pause. Longer this time. I heard her breathe. "Savannah is closer to Charleston than Providence is," she said finally. "It is. And closer to New York than California was. Also true. A weekend drive," she said. "If we wanted to meet somewhere in the middle. 3.5 hours. I checked. She was quiet for a moment, then. "Tell me about the building," I told her. She listened. She asked questions, she said. "The conversion is going to be tricky if the original structural grid doesn't align with the residential units they want. It doesn't. So you'd have the case for adaptive reuse, Wuf over wholesale reconfiguration. That's the whole argument." "You'd win it," she said simply. "You always do." I smiled. "Is that your way of saying take the project?" "It's my way of saying let's figure out the logistics together." A pause. "We can make it work if we both want it to." "I want it to," I said. "So do I." And then, "Savannah in the fall is beautiful, by the way. I've always wanted to do a project down there." "Is that a hint?" "It's a fact," she said innocently. "Do with it what you will." I laughed. Outside my window, Providence was going dark. In New York, Olivia was sitting in a studio apartment with her design boards and her coffee and her phone, and the year stretched out in front of both of us, full of distance and difficulty, and the specific, necessary work of building something that actually holds. I thought about the East Wall in Providence, about how the mistake had been trying to fix the surface problem before addressing what was underneath. Solve the problem in the right order. We were doing that. Finally, the foundation first. Everything else could follow. The Savannah project said yes on a Tuesday. I said yes back on a Wednesday, after spending 48 hours running logistics with Olivia on the phone, mapping out how 2 people in 2 different cities were going to manage an already complicated long-distance situation with a 3rd city now added to the equation. We drew it out on paper, each of us on our own end of the phone, like architects working on the same blueprint from opposite sides of a table. Providence wrapping in 3 weeks. A 2-week overlap in Charleston before Savannah started. Monthly visits. Alternating 1 month I went to New York. The next she came to Charleston or Savannah. Video calls every night that either of us could manage it. Actual scheduled time. Written into both our calendars. Treated with the same seriousness as a client meeting. It wasn't romantic. Exactly. It was practical. But I'd learned something in the previous 2 months that I hadn't fully understood before. Love without a plan is just a feeling. and feelings, without structure to hold them, have a way of leaking out through the gaps. We're essentially project managing our relationship, Olivia said, on the phone the night we finalized the schedule. Is that a problem? No, she said. It's actually the most us thing possible. She was right. We were both people who built things, who looked at a complicated situation and figured out the load-bearing elements, who knew that the work of maintaining something valuable was never as glamorous as the moment you first recognized its worth. Providence wrapped on a Friday in early October. I drove back to Charleston that same evening. Windows down, the coastal air coming in thick and salt-edged, and I felt something unclench in my chest that I hadn't fully noticed was tight. The house was exactly as I'd left it. The third porch step creaked. The kitchen smelled like cedar and old wood. The lamp on the side table in the living room was off, but the upstairs hallway light was on the one I'd apparently gotten into the habit of leaving on without meaning to. Some unconscious signal to myself that the house was still occupied, still alive, still worth coming back to. I went upstairs. I stood in the doorway of our workspace. Her design boards were still against the wall. Her books were still on the shelf. The photographs were still pinned exactly where she'd put them. The wooden box was on the work table, in the center, like it had always been there. Sat down at my desk. I didn't turn on the lamp. I just sat in the half-dark for a while, in the room that was half mine and half hers, and I let the quiet be what it was. My phone buzzed. A text from Olivia. "You home?" I wrote back, "Just got in." 3 seconds later, "How does it feel?" I looked around the room, the photographs, the 2 desks. The shelf where her design books sat next to my restoration manuals like they'd always belonged there. I wrote, "Like the right place." A pause. Then "Good. Get some sleep. You drove 6 hours," I wrote. "Call me in the morning?" She wrote back immediately. "Obviously." I went to sleep in my own bed in my own house, in the city I'd been leaving and coming back to for years. But it felt different this time. Not like a waypoint. Not like a place I was passing through. It felt like somewhere I was choosing, on purpose with full knowledge of what that meant. 2 days later, I drove to Savannah. The warehouse was on the eastern edge of the historic district, 4 stories. Cast iron columns, original heart pine floors that had somehow survived 130 years of use and neglect. The development group wanted residential units on the upper 3 floors and commercial space on the ground level. They wanted it done without gutting what made it worth saving in the first place. That was always the balance. That was always the work. I spent the first week doing what I always did at the start, walking the building slowly, floor by floor, learning its particular problems. The cast iron columns on the second floor had 2 stress fractures that needed addressing before anything else. The pine floors on the third floor had significant water damage along the north wall from a roof failure that had been patched badly sometime in the 90s. The ground floor had a loading bay that the developer wanted converted to retail frontage, which was going to require a structural argument I was already preparing. I called Olivia every evening. I told her about the building, the way I always had, photo by photo, detail by detail, except now when I sent the photos, I sent them with context. Not just "look at this wall," but "here's why this matters. Here's what I'm trying to solve. Here's where I'm stuck." And she responded with the same specificity she'd brought to the Providence problem. She had an eye for spatial logic that was different from mine, but complementary to it. And more than once in those first weeks, she said something offhand that unlocked a problem I'd been circling for days. "You should charge me a consulting fee," I told her one night. "I'll put it on your tab," she said. "You already owe me for 12 years of free emotional labor. That's fair. It's extremely fair." A beat. "How's the cast iron situation?" "Manageable. The fractures are in compression, not tension, so we have more options than I initially thought." Meaning, I can make the case for select reinforcement instead of full replacement, which saves the developer money and saves me the argument about historical integrity. Everybody wins. Everybody wins, I confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I put in for a site visit in Georgia." I sat up straighter.
What? There's a hospitality project in Atlanta that the firm has been peripherally involved with.
I told the senior partners I wanted to do an on-site assessment. A pause. Atlanta is 2.5 hours from Savannah. I absorbed that. That is a coincidence, I said. Remarkable coincidence, she agreed. Completely deadpan. When? 3 weeks from Thursday. 3 weeks from Thursday. I pulled up my project schedule in my head. Phase 2 of the structural assessment would be wrapping. I'd have a 4-day window before the contractor meeting started. I can drive up, I said. I was going to drive down, she said, after the Atlanta visit. If that works, okay. And then, softer, I miss your face. I miss yours too, I said. Screens don't do it justice. She laughed. That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said. I'm working on it. You are, she said. You really are. She came to Savannah on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks and 2 days later. I met her at the parking garage 2 blocks from the warehouse. Because she'd texted from the road and I'd been on site, and the timing had worked out without either of us planning it. She pulled in, got out of the car, and looked at me across the roof of the vehicle with an expression I was starting to recognize as her particular version of relief. Hi, she said. Hi. I walked around the car. How was Atlanta? The project is a mess, and I told them so with great diplomacy. She let me pull her into a hug. She held on for a moment longer than a greeting required. They're going to fix it. Eventually. You'll make sure of it. I will. She pulled back, looked at me. You look tired. I'm fine. You look tired and you're telling me you're fine. Which means you've been running on coffee and project momentum for 2 weeks. 3 weeks, Daniel. I'm fine, I said again. Then, I'm fine and I'm tired. Both things. She shook her head. Show me the building. I took her through it the next morning. I'd been waiting to do this, to walk someone I trusted through the space, and through talk the problems out loud. The way I'd always found helped me think. She wore flat shoes and asked precise questions and stood in the middle of the 3rd floor with its water-damaged pine and its original windows and its century-old bones, and turned slowly in a full circle, looking at everything. The developer is wrong about the loading bay, she said. I know. You can't make it retail without losing the proportional relationship between the ground floor and the street. It'll read as a renovation instead of a restoration. That's my exact argument. What are they saying? That retail frontage increases the commercial value by 30%. What are you saying? That the building's historical character is part of what makes it commercially desirable in the first place. And undermining it to add retail frontage is cutting off the thing that's driving the value. I looked at her. I have a meeting with them next week. You'll win it. You keep saying that. Because you keep winning them. She turned to face me fully. You're very good at making people see what they're about to lose. Something in the way she said it made me look at her differently. She wasn't just talking about the building. I've gotten better at it, I said. Recently. She held my gaze. Yes, she said. You have. We had 2 days. We made the most of them. Dinner the first night at a place on the river that she'd looked up on the drive down. Which was exactly the kind of thing she did showed up. Prepared. With a plan. Having already thought ahead to what the evening could be. We walked after. Talked until late. Came back to the apartment the project was covering for me, and sat on the floor with takeout containers and her design laptop and went through the full New York project scope together. Which we'd never properly done, and which turned into 3 hours of the most genuinely engaged conversation I'd had in months. At some point, she looked up from her laptop and said, I've been thinking about what you said on the fire escape. I knew exactly what she meant. I'd been waiting for her to come back to it. Knowing she would. Knowing it was sitting in the back of the conversation, the way important things always sat patient. Waiting for the right moment. And I said. She set the laptop aside. She looked at me carefully. In that direct way she had. I want to say yes, she said. When the time comes, I want you to know that. I'm not hedging or stalling. I'm saying yes in advance. Essentially. She paused. But I need one thing first. What? I need us to live in the same city for a while, she said it simply. Not forever, obviously. We both work the way we work. Travel is going to be part of it. But I need before we make something permanent. I need to know what it actually feels like. To come home to the same place. To have a morning routine that includes you. She looked at her hands. I spent a lot of years imagining what that would be like. I want to actually experience it before it becomes a legal agreement. That's completely reasonable, I said. You're not disappointed? I'm relieved, I said honestly, because I want the same thing. I want us to have had the actual experience of it before we make it official. I leaned forward. When you come back from New York, when the project wraps, come home to Charleston. She looked at me. Move in, I said. The room is already half yours. The house is already more you than it is me. Come home, Olivia. Properly. She was quiet for a long moment. Properly, she repeated softly. Properly, I confirmed. She looked at me for a long time. Long enough that I started to wonder if I'd misjudged the moment. And then she said, simply and plainly, and without any of the hedging or management she used to apply to everything she felt about me. Okay, just that. Okay. But the way she said it this time was different from every other time she'd said it in the past 12 years. It didn't sound like the end of a negotiation. It sounded like the beginning of something. 8 months later, I wrapped the Savannah project on a Friday in June. The cast iron columns were reinforced and documented. The heart pine floors were restored across all 4 stories. The water-damaged section on the 3rd floor, addressed by sourcing matching period-appropriate material from a salvage yard in Mississippi that I'd spent 3 weeks tracking down. The loading bay remained, a loading bay I'd won that argument in week 6, with a presentation that Olivia had helped me structure over 2 evenings on the phone. And the developer had ultimately conceded that I was right, which they admitted with the specific grace of people who had just been shown they were wrong about something they'd been very confident about. The building was good. Better than good. It was the kind of restoration that would still be standing 100 years from now. And people walking through it would feel the original intention of the space without quite being able to articulate why. That was the goal. Always the goal. Make it so right that the work becomes invisible. Olivia's New York project had wrapped 2 weeks earlier. She'd called me from the conference room after the final client presentation, still slightly breathless with the specific adrenaline of a finished thing that had gone well. They cried, she said. The clients? The lead client. Happy crying. She said it was exactly what she'd envisioned, and better than she'd imagined. Which is, that's the best possible version of that sentence. That's your sentence, I said. Exactly. Ryan shook my hand afterward and said it was the best creative direction he'd seen on a project this scale. A pause. Professionally. Just professionally. I know, I said. And I did know. Whatever that situation had been in its early, tentative, unspoken form, it had remained exactly what she'd told me. It was his interest. Not hers, and she had navigated it with the clarity and honesty she'd promised me. You earned that. We both worked hard. You led it. That's different. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm coming home. 2 words. I'm coming home. Not I'm coming to Charleston. Not I'll be back next week. Home. She'd started calling it that sometime around February, and I'd noticed the first time she did it and hadn't said anything because I didn't want to make a thing of it, and then I'd thought about it for 3 after. I know, I said. I'll be there. She flew in on a Tuesday morning. I was already back in Charleston. I'd driven home from Savannah the previous Thursday. Taken the weekend to open the house properly. Stock the kitchen. Make sure everything was ready. Not in an anxious way. In the way you prepare for something you've been looking forward to for a long time and want to receive correctly. I picked her up from the airport. She came out of the terminal with one rolling suitcase and a carry-on and her design bag over her shoulder and the look of someone who had been traveling since 5 in the morning and was running on determination and caffeine. She saw me at the curb. She stopped walking for just a second. Then she kept walking, right up to me, and she put her arms around me before she said a single word. I held her the way I'd held her at the Brooklyn sublet when she'd said I came, the way that tries to close the distance that's been accumulating. Hi, she said. Into my shoulder. Hi, I said. I'm so tired. I know, I made coffee. She pulled back. At home? At home, I confirmed. She looked at me, and she smiled, not the big, bright smile, but the small one. The one I'd known for 12 years and finally understood the meaning of. We drove home. She walked in the front door, dropped her bag and stood in the entryway for a moment. Just stood there, looking at the living room, the hallway, the stairs. It's smaller than I remember, she said. You've been living in New York. Everything is smaller than New York. She looked at the stairs. Can I go up? It's your house too, I said. She went up the stairs. I heard her footsteps stop at the top at the door of our workspace. I heard the door open. I waited. After a moment, she came back to the top of the stairs and looked down at me. You kept everything, she said. Every photograph, I confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she came back downstairs. And she sat on the bottom step, which was not where either of us usually sat. But it seemed like the right place for whatever she needed to say. I sat down next to her. I thought about this a lot, she said. Coming back, what it would feel like. And it feels better than I thought. She looked at the hallway in front of us. It feels like mine. It is yours. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I didn't move. I want to redecorate the living room, she said. Okay. The couch is the wrong color for the light in the afternoon. You've thought about this. I've thought about this for approximately 8 months. She paused. Also, the kitchen tiles could be regrouted. And the third porch step needs to be fixed. The third porch step is a feature. The third porch step is a liability. It announces when someone's coming home. She was quiet for a beat. Then, okay, the step stays. I laughed, she laughed. And we sat on the bottom stair together in the house that was both of ours now, with the afternoon coming through the windows, and 12 years, finally, completely settled into what they'd always been building toward. That should have been the ending, and it almost was, except that 3 weeks after she came home, something happened that I genuinely did not see coming. The kind of thing that arrives quietly, and then turns out to be the most significant thing in the room. Her sister Claire called. On a Sunday morning. Early enough that Olivia was still asleep, which meant I was the one who picked up, which meant Claire said the thing to me first. Tell her I need to talk to her today, Claire said. It's important. Everything okay? A pause. I'm pregnant. I sat down at the kitchen table. Claire, I know. I know. Her voice was doing something complicated. I just found out yesterday. I needed a day to sit with it before I told anyone. Another pause. I need to tell Olivia. I'll get her up, I said. Daniel. Her voice stopped me. How's she doing? Really? Really? I thought about the past 3 weeks. About how Olivia had started her own practice, just announced it one morning over coffee. Very matter of fact, like she'd been thinking about it for a while, and had simply reached the decision. She'd taken on 2 clients already. She'd reorganized the workspace upstairs into something even more functional, adding a proper meeting area in the corner I'd always left empty. She was making the house hers in all the ways she hadn't let herself before. She's really good, I said. The best I've seen her. Good. A beat. She sounds different when she talks about you now. She sounds settled. She is, I said. We both are. Good, Claire said again. And this time it didn't sound like the end of a negotiation. I woke Olivia up. She took the phone and went out onto the porch. I made coffee and didn't listen, because some conversations belong entirely to sisters. 20 minutes later, she came back in with bright eyes and a full expression that was doing about 4 things at once. She's pregnant, Olivia said. I know. She told me. She told you first? I answered the phone. Olivia processed that. She's scared and excited, and she's already named 3 parenting books she wants me to read so I can be useful. That's very Claire. That's completely Claire. She sat down. She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug I'd pushed toward her. I'm going to be an aunt. You are? She looked at me over the rim of her mug, and something in her face did a thing I recognized. The thing where she was feeling something large and didn't quite want to say it directly, but also knew that the whole agreement between us was directness. What? I said. She set the mug down. If we're going to do the thing we talked about in Savannah. Eventually. She met my eyes. I want it to be before this baby is born. I looked at her. I want Claire there when it happens, she said. And I want this baby to come into a family where we're already us. Officially, she stopped. Is that how long until the baby? I said. 7 months. 7 months. I thought about the fire escape in Brooklyn and what I'd said, about putting it on the table, about how she'd said it didn't scare her, and she didn't know why it should. 7 months was enough time. For the right thing, 7 months was exactly enough time. Tell Claire to block out a date in March, I said. Olivia went very still. I don't have a ring yet, I said. I've been thinking about what kind of ring, and I want to do it right. And I want to actually ask you properly, not in a conversation about your sister's pregnancy, at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. But I want you to know, I said, that when I ask, I already know what I'm asking. And if the answer is yes, and I think it's yes, you told me it was yes on the fire escape, then March works. She put her hand over her mouth. Are you crying? I said. No, she said, muffled behind her hand. Olivia, I'm not crying. She lowered her hand. Her eyes were absolutely bright. You are the most unexpected person. You've known me for 12 years, and you are still surprising me. She shook her head slowly. March, she said. March is good. March, I confirmed. She picked up her coffee. I picked up mine. We sat at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning with the light coming through the window and the third porch step doing its particular creak as the house settled around us. And we didn't say anything else for a while. We didn't need to. I asked her in February. I hadn't planned February specifically, I'd said March. And March had been the plan. And then I came home one evening from a preliminary consult on a potential project in Nashville and found the workspace upstairs completely rearranged. She'd moved both desks to face each other, not side by side anymore, but across from each other, so that when we worked we'd be looking at one another across the shared space, rather than working in parallel. I stood in the doorway. She was at her desk, head down, working, the lamp throwing warm light across the design boards and the photograph still pinned to the wall and the wooden box in its place on the corner of her work table. She looked up. Too much, she said. No, I said. It's better this way. She looked at the arrangement. I thought so too. I walked to my desk. I sat down. I looked at her across the space between our desks and I thought, this is what I was trying to protect for 12 years by not saying anything. This specific thing. This woman, in this room, with this much of herself already woven into every corner of the space I'd built and come back to and never quite gotten right until she'd started making it hers. I'd been carrying the ring for 3 weeks. I'd ordered it in January, a simple band. Nothing ornate, with a detail on the inside of the band that I'd had engraved. 3 words. Still warm. Daniel. I reached into my jacket pocket. She was already looking at me. Because she knew me. She'd known me for 12 years. She could read the change in my face before I'd said a word. Daniel, she said quietly. I was going to wait until March, I said, but you moved the desks. I moved the desks, and I came home, and you were just here in this room, working. And I stopped. Breathed. This is exactly what I've wanted every time I came home for the last 3 years. And I just walked in, and there it was. And I don't want to wait another month to call it what it is. I came around the desk. I didn't go down on one knee dramatically. I sat on the edge of her desk, right in front of her, so we were at the same level, and I held the ring out between us. She looked at it. Then she looked at me. I've been slow about most of the important things in my life, I said. I'm trying to be faster. This is me being faster. I paused. Marry me, Olivia. Not because it's the next logical step, because I can't imagine being in this room with anyone else. Because you saw my whole life pinned up on a wall and chose to keep showing up anyway. Because you fixed my east wall drainage problem and texted my structural engineer belt and drove to Savannah to see a building and said yes to coming home before I figured out exactly what I was asking. I looked at her. Because I love you in all the specific ways that took me 12 years to finally say out loud. And I don't want to spend any more time not saying them. She took the ring from my hand. She looked at the inside of the band. She read the engraving, and then she looked up at me, and her eyes were doing the bright thing. And she said, you engraved a coffee joke. It's not a joke. It's a reference. To a note I left on a grocery receipt. To the first morning you stayed, I said, and everything that came after it. She pressed her lips together, but she was fighting a smile and losing. Yes, she said. She slipped the ring onto her finger herself, which was exactly the kind of thing Olivia would do, and which I loved her for completely. She held her hand out, looked at it, then looked at me. It fits, she said. I measured while you were sleeping. You never noticed. She stared at me. You measured my finger while I was asleep. I used a piece of string, very carefully. That is either incredibly romantic or mildly alarming. Probably both, I said. She laughed. And then she stood up and put her arms around me, and I held her in the room that had started as mine and become hers, and was now completely and permanently ours. We told Claire that evening, she cried. Real crying. Not the contained Claire version actual tears, which was so unusual that Olivia started crying too. Which was the first time I'd seen Olivia cry happy tears since the morning I came home early and found her standing at the top of my staircase with her arms out and her face full of fear. Fear that had turned out to be love wearing its most honest expression. Claire said, I knew the moment you called me from the airport all those years ago, and I heard how you talked about him. Olivia said, You never told me. It wasn't mine to tell. I called my mother that night. She was in her element on the phone, delighted, asking 20 questions, making plans I hadn't thought of yet. She said, I always liked that girl. She had good sense. She has the best sense, I said. Better than yours, my mother said. I say that with love, I know. We got married in May. Small ceremony. Claire was there. A handful of friends from both our professional lives. The officiant was a woman Olivia had worked with twice and trusted completely. The venue was a garden behind a historic house in the Preservation District, a place I'd consulted in 2 years earlier, whose owner had extended an open invitation for anything I ever needed. Olivia wore a dress the color of old linen, warm and simple, and completely her. She walked in without ceremony, without a processional, just came around the corner of the garden path and walked to where I was standing and looked at me like I was a problem she'd already solved and was simply confirming the answer. We said things we'd written ourselves. I told her that I had spent my career learning to see the value in things other people had passed by without looking. That I was embarrassed it had taken me 12 years to apply that same attention to the most valuable thing in my own life. That I promised to look. Every day, on purpose, to see her clearly and say what I saw instead of keeping it in a box with her name on it. She told me that she had stopped waiting for me sometime around month 3 in New York and had started simply trusting instead. That trust had felt different from waiting lighter, more solid, more real, that she was choosing to trust me every day going forward, and that she expected the same in return and would absolutely call it out when she didn't get it. The small crowd laughed. We said the real words. She slipped her ring on. She'd kept the engagement ring, worn it for 3 months. And now the wedding band went alongside it, and she looked at her hand, and then looked up at me with that expression I had, finally, after 12 years, learned to read correctly. It meant, I see you. I choose you. I'm not going anywhere. We came home that evening to the house on the street in Charleston. The third porch step creaked. She laughed. I said, I told you it was a feature. She went in first. I followed. She went upstairs. And I followed. And she stopped in the doorway of our workspace, our room, the one that had started as my office and become something built by both of us out of 12 years of almost, and a wooden box and photographs pinned to a wall and letters finally sent. She stood in the doorway. I stood behind her. The 2 desks faced each other. The photographs were on the wall. The wooden box was on the corner of her desk. I want to hang something new, she said. What? I don't know yet. Something for the next 12 years. I put my hand on her shoulder. She reached up and covered it with hers. I thought about the things I knew how to do. How to look at something that was structurally compromised and see what it was supposed to be. How to work with what existed instead of tearing it down. How to restore something to better than it had been, not by making it new, but by understanding what made it worth saving in the first place. I thought about how none of that had prepared me for the hardest restoration project of my life, which turned out to be not a building at all. It was this, it was us. It was 12 years of something built wrong that had to be carefully, honestly, painstakingly relaid on a better foundation. And we had done it, not perfectly, not without arguments and missed calls and moments of fear, and the very real possibility, in a studio apartment in Brooklyn, that it might not hold. But we had done it the right way, in the right order. with full attention to what was underneath before we touched the surface. The house was quiet around us. The city was outside. The evening was coming in slow and warm through the windows. And everything that mattered was exactly where it was supposed to be. Home is not a place you return to. Home is the person you build it with. Brick by brick, truth by truth, letter by answered letter. Until one day you look up and realize you are already there, and you have been for a very long time. You just finally stopped pretending otherwise.